Hi, ladies. All right, we have a great group. We're letting everyone come in. I am so excited for today's call. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Caroline De Posada, and I host these expert interviews with people that I admire, that I trust, that I follow, people that are going to give us a different insight, different perspective on all things mindset, wellness, and relationships. And today, I have the privilege to present to you a person who I know personally, but not personally, right? So I know her because she is the daughter of my life coach, Susan Ford Collins, who happens to be on this call. And if you guys haven't seen our interviews with her, I've had 2 interviews with Susan. She's absolutely amazing. So I encourage you to listen to those. But Susan is a healthy eater. I go to her house, I used to go to her house every single week, and she would make me these amazing meals. And every time she'd make me a meal, she'd say to me, I'd say to her, where'd you get this, this great bread? And she says, oh, Margaret taught me how to do it. Where did you get these canisters? Oh, Margaret bought them for me. How do you know about this supplement? Oh, Margaret introduced me to it. So she would always talk about her daughter, Margaret. And she would say to me, yeah, she's got this website and she shares her information, and, you can learn follow her for all sorts of recipes. And then I started following her, and she is a wealth of information. Now I'm going to give you a disclaimer. Margaret is a doctor, and her primary job is being a doctor. And for years, she hasn't even shared her face because this is not her profession. This is like a side thing that she does as a passion project to share foods that have worked for her. So know before we start this call that all the information that we're sharing today is for entertainment and education. She is not acting in the capacity as a doctor, nor is she giving medical advice today. Our goal is to inspire you through her own personal journey, because she got into this work not as a doctor who was healing patients. She got into this work as a woman who was healing herself. She had all these health conditions, and she needed to find a way to figure out what was going to trigger her, make her feel worse, and what was going to make her feel better. And she found that through food. So that is why she is here today. Margaret, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Karen.
Good. So thank you for agreeing to meet with me, because I know this isn't something that you do often, right?
Definitely not.
You spend most of your day in very, very intense work. And, this is this is going to be a vacation for you compared to what you normally do.
Love it. Super excited. Let's go.
So the first question that I have for you is, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the community and let them know what were the health conditions that you were facing that led you down this path of discovering food?
So I pretty much didn't feel well my whole childhood or adult life. I didn't even really know what it felt like to feel well, which, looking back on it, is pretty scary. I pretty much had a stomach ache every day. I used to frequently have headaches. I would get bizarre rashes. I was intolerant to lots of foods and other triggers. And I just had very low energy and just didn't feel well. I was worked up a quadrillion times, and sadly, in spite of being in medicine, it kind of failed me really in terms of helping me to figure out what was wrong and what would make me feel better. And I always was a healthy eater. I was always tinkering with things, but I really just wanted to figure out how to feel my best. And that was just my highest priority. And I started this Instagram and blogging, et cetera, started when I went paleo in 2013. And I just was really using the Instagram as a food journal, really just to sort of keep track of what I was eating and be able to go back and be like, wait a minute, what was I eating? And so I just started taking pictures, and it was private initially. And then I opened it up and I was like shocked that there were people out there that actually wanted to know what I was doing. And it just grew, and it was in the pre-algorithm days. So it was like really the good Instagram days.
Yeah.
But what was extra cool about the connection here was not only was I sharing, but I was learning from other people, and I was starting to discover things that I didn't know about. And I actually, my health condition, that main health condition that I deal with is mast cell activation syndrome, which is sort of like histamine intolerance squared. And I wouldn't have known that that's what I had, which often there's underlying things, there's still things that need to be uncovered, but I wouldn't have known about that had I not been here and learning about that from other people. And so my interest in continuing to be here is just hopefully to share and maybe inspire people.
So I have a question.
Realize that you can do things with what you do and don't do. You know, what you do and don't do can really be impactful.
That is amazing. So I have a question that you said that they'd done all the workup for you, but you didn't learn what your condition was until you started sharing and blogging in 2013.
So it was actually even a couple of years into there. Yeah, I had done like the whole autoimmune workup like 10 times.
And that didn't solve the problem. It
didn't solve the problem. It didn't solve the problem. I was always told you probably have an autoimmune disease, but we just can't figure out which one it is. And so I had not only done paleo, but I had done the autoimmune protocol, which I don't know if people are familiar with paleo or even the autoimmune protocol, but paleo was sort of basically like completely unprocessed. There's no grains, there's no dairy, there's no legumes, beans, and such. It really eliminates the bulk of inflammatory foods. And the AIP is that another level where you're also removing other inflammatory tending foods like nightshades, tomato, eggplant, a bunch of spices get removed, eggs, which would be allowed on paleo, but not on AIP. And so I was already like limiting myself, and someone in my community kept saying, you need to look at histamine. I think something of what's going on with you is related to histamine. And at that point, I was already pretty limited. Like I was already, you know, in this shrinking bubble of food options. And I just, you know, I avoided her input for a while just because it was like, I can't reinvent myself another time. Like I'd already kind of gotten all of and I'm a systems person. So I'd already gotten my systems all in place, and I was doing all of this batch prepping and, you know, leftovers. I think I had a hashtag like, you know, I love leftovers or something. I don't know. And finally, when I looked into the histamine thing and I went low histamine at her recommendation, it was like unbelievable. And
so wait, I have a question. Were you already doing paleo when she made the suggestion about the antihistamine?
Correct.
So there were foods on the paleo diet that were still triggering your response.
Correct.
And you weren't, and you still didn't feel well, even though, because that, what you're saying right now is so important, Margaret, because I find that this happens with women in our community all the time, and men as well, which is they try something, right? So somebody says, oh, this is the next best thing, paleo diet. And you try the paleo diet and you don't feel better. You still don't feel better. And then you say, well, the paleo diet didn't work. But when you've done enough of those, paleo, keto, vegan, and you still don't feel better, you start to give up and start having bad habits again, because you're like, why am I sacrificing all of this if I'm still not going to get the results and I'm not going to feel better? So I think this is such an important point what made you not give up on paleo if you were still not feeling well? Why didn't you give up on that?
So I knew that eating real whole foods was super important. There was I didn't have any doubt that eating, I mean, that's what humans have been doing forever, right? I mean, I knew that was a good thing. The issue for me was that because I have this mast cell issue, it was not only that there were some foods, like for example, bone broth wasn't great for me because bone broth is super high in histamine, or I was doing batch cooking and leaving all of the leftovers in the refrigerator. And this was a double confusing thing because I would eat it the first day and be fine. And then I would eat it 2 days later and be sick. And I was like, what is that? Well, leftovers build up histamine. So it was like, yeah, the food was fine the first day and then it wasn't okay 2 days later, which was so like, what? You know, I couldn't figure it out at first. And yes, there are some other foods, like fermented foods are very high histamine. And so those were also something very focused on as being like, eat your sauerkraut, it's so good for you. But it made me really sick, you know, and it was like crazy, you know? So in some ways, some of the things that I was doing when I switched were making me more uncomfortable. But I really knew that, and I don't follow a strictly paleo. I don't really follow it any strictly. It's sort of my own customized template anymore. But I still think that we're designed to eat foods that our body recognizes. And I think that, you know, a globally paleo template emphasizes whole, real foods that aren't processed, that don't have chemicals in them, that are things that when your body sees them, it knows what they are.
Yeah. So,
and that's why I still stuck with that global template, very customized to myself.
Right, right. And how many years have you been eating this way?
Well, 2013 is when I went paleo. I'm a tinkerer, so I'm always hacking something. I'm always trying something. I have been low carb for most of that time. Hardcore keto for parts of it, AIP for a long part of it. Although now there have been a lot of reintroductions. Some things haven't come back in. Egg hasn't come back in because I have an actual documented allergy to that. And the spices, the nightshade spices haven't made their way back in, but I have been able to reintroduce. And I'm very into food variety now. So where there was a time in all of this experiment where everything was like shrinking. Now I'm really trying to like expand to find the largest number of foods that work for me, right? Because not everything works for every person. And that has, I think, a lot to do with genetics. It has a lot to do with microbiome, which we don't really understand yet. And you even may have things that work for you today that don't work for you in 6 months or a year or 5 years. And that could be in for women, that can also be hormonal, right? So there's like, I think you have to always be adapting and be flexible because we change.
So I think it's really fascinating that you've logged and documented all of this, because that must help you tremendously in being able to find those patterns when all of a sudden you're not feeling well. You can go back and say, well, this is what this has looked like. One of the things that I think people struggle with, and you just said food variety, which is what triggered this question, which is that people are afraid of being bored by the same foods all the time. They're afraid of being able to go to a social event and not having anything to eat at that social event because there's just nothing available that they can eat. Alcohol is a huge component. Like they want to be able to go have a drink and a social drink. And when you're not feeling well, when you're really not feeling well, if you have a normal reaction to foods, you can kind of play with that. But when you're really not feeling well, and it is your priority to feel better, you have to make certain choices. So how did you, for yourself, handle those social events and those moments where you're traveling or where you're in an airport or where you're, how do you deal with that and feel like you're not being deprived and, like you're a sacrificial lamb all the time?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I don't have all the answers there. Traveling, we always try to stay in an Airbnb, so I have access to a kitchen. I even have a blog post about how when we did a road trip to take my son to college, I actually made all of my meals ahead and I actually brought them all on dry ice. And I heated them in this device that I have that's like a little plug-in lunchbox. It's called a Hot Logic. And you can even use it in the car. So, I mean, you have to get creative. that's not an easy part, especially in my case, because in my case, it's not only the food, but it's also how they're prepared and how long they've been sitting around, whether they were properly refrigerated, how fresh they were to begin with. So that's a hard one. I'm not gonna try to gloss over that one, because that's tricky. I usually eat ahead. I'm a very disciplined person, and I've been at this for a very long time. And so it doesn't bother me to go someplace and have food around. It's not a temptation to me. But I can understand how for other people that can be really hard. And I guess I just try to always remember that the sacrifice of not having the whatever, right? Like you're at a party and you're not going to have the whatever that is. It has to be weighed against how are you going to feel, And I just made a decision at some point in my life that feeling well was more important than those momentary pleasures or indulgences. That's my priority system. It may or may not be somebody else's, but I guess if you just bring to consciousness that decision and you say, I'm going to have this and I know and accept that I'm not going to feel well, then at least you're making a choice.
You're being intentional.
It's at least intentional. It's at least like you're making that decision. I just got to the point where not feeling well, and my not feeling well is not like I'm not going to feel well for an hour. It's like I'm going to have a week where I'm going to feel crummy. Or if I'm really off, if I'm not, and I'm not, I'm super disciplined, hardcore, but if I wasn't, it would be like all the time I wouldn't feel well. And that just isn't okay with me, and it's just, that's my priority. And so, I don't eat out a lot. My husband's a super good sport about that. And, I guess you try to do other things. You try to have people over so that you're in charge of the food, or, I have a couple of restaurants that I trust, and, that's a tricky one.
My husband always says, do you want it or do you wish it? Because a lot of times they're like, I wish I felt better. I wish I felt better. Or I wish that I, didn't have this problem, or I wish that whatever. But wanting it, like you had to make a choice. Like it's not, I wish I wasn't having these reactions to the food. I want to feel better and not have reactions to food. So I'm just willing to do what it takes.
Yeah.
Because I want it bad enough. And
Yes.
you're an exemplary person when it comes to that. That's why I wanted my whole community to meet you, because you're amazing when it comes to that. When it comes to everything, but do you drink alcohol?
I do not. I used to. That was I didn't used to drink it a lot, but it was a huge trigger. Alcohol is a ferment, so obviously it's high in histamine. So that's not a good one for me. And I just sort of finally made a decision a couple of years ago that, my occasional glass of wine just set me back too far.
So now that you said that, I got a private question on the chat, which is, our members don't know what histamine is. Could you explain that to them real quick?
So, how to explain this? So histidine is an amino acid, and in foods, and when bacteria start to work on the histidine in foods, they turn it into histamine. And histamine, if you think of what an antihistamine is, right? Like think about what you would take an antihistamine for. That's what the kind of symptoms are when you have histamine issues, like allergic type symptoms, redness, rashes, itching, flushing. It can be GI, it can be a migraine. And there are certain foods that are inherently high in histamine. There are certain cooking processes that increase the amount of histamine. And there's also storage practices cooking something and then letting it in the refrigerator where it kind of like micro spoils, right? It's not spoiled, but it's sitting around and bacteria are able to start breaking it down and making that conversion. So I don't know if that
I mean,
answers.
yes. I think that you answered it as medically and a person combined, like you tried to make it as easy as possible for us lay people to understand it with a great medical definition. So thank you. So when it comes to meal prepping, now a lot of people are constantly asking me about meal prepping. And now that you have discovered that there is this bacteria that happens in foods that are left over, how on earth do you meal prep if you can't eat a food 2 days after you've cooked it?
So the biggest silver lining, like that resistance that I had to this follower that just kept saying, like, you need to look into this, you need to look into this, and you need to look into this. And finally, I was like, okay, here goes another Margaret reinventing herself, right? Like, here goes another, here we go again. And the biggest silver lining was that I learned that so many foods freeze well. And that has been such a game changer for me, because I have a huge freezer in the kitchen and I have one in the garage, and they are full of prepared foods. And it's been wonderful because I can make a meal really quickly out of things that are already cooked and prepared, or in some cases they're just whole meals that I prepare and freeze.
So give us an example of things that you freeze.
Okay, so every week I make some sort of a chicken thigh dish. It's usually just chicken thighs that has some sort of different seasoning on it, and I will cook them, and then I will chop them up, and I will make them into single serving portions and in little mason jars, and I freeze them. So when I want to make
the chicken thighs in the mason jars, I don't remember that. Oh wow! And why do you do that as opposed to
single serving ones?
Oh, that's
so for a lot of my foods, this may not apply to a lot of your audience, but a lot of my food is really just for me, because my husband is, lucky enough to be able to eat almost anything. And so a lot of my meals are things that I'm preparing for myself. So every week I always have chicken in the freezer that's ready to prepare. And I may put that into a bowl, like I may saute some vegetables and add the chicken, heat it up and add the chicken and add some cauliflower rice and add a sauce to it. And that's like a meal. And I always have cooked ground turkey. So those are items, and they're single serving, they're portioned and frozen. Other things, believe it or not, beans can be frozen. I'm sure they probably wouldn't be to your liking, but for me, I don't think beans necessarily have to be frozen in terms of the histamine issue, but I can't consume, if I make beans, I can't consume them quickly enough to even be an appropriate leftover.
I thought you couldn't eat beans in the paleo diet. Did you find that was a food
they're not a strictly paleo item. They're an introduction for me, and they were an expansion beyond strictly paleo. I think that beans are more of a trigger for people, partly related to a substance called lectin, and also I think phytates, some different plant chemicals. But I soak them and I pressure cook them, and it makes them a lot more digestible. So, and I'm eating those because I am fairly low carb and keto. I'm eating them in small quantities. So I have little trays, and I will either buy canned Eden brand does soak and pressure cook all their beans, and they cook them with seaweed so that they're a lot more digestible. So I may either do that, or I may Eden Foods. Eden Foods. EDEN. Mm-hmm. All of their beans are soaked and pressure cooked. Or if I make them myself, and I will use like a little, almost like ice cube trays, and freeze small portions. So I'm not eating a whole like cup of beans. I'm eating like a 2 tablespoon portion which will improve the variety of my food without being a super carby, starchy item. And I like to just sort of like add those to meals. That's something a little bit unusual that I freeze. I frequently make like whole meals that I'll take to work. And my favorite combination is to take frozen cauliflower rice and take a protein. It could be chicken or it could be turkey. And then I'll add like some sauces. Like I make something called ginger scallion sauce, which is ginger and scallions. It's delicious. Or I make like an avocado dip or artichoke dip. And I'll put like all of those things, maybe a cube of the beans, maybe a cube of a seasoning sauce and a protein and the cauliflower rice into a Pyrex, and I freeze that. So it's like a ready-made meal. And I may bring avocado with me. I actually sometimes even freeze the avocado in. It is a little funny color, but it tastes delicious when you kind of mash it all together.
And then you heat it in the microwave?
I heat it. Usually I heat when I'm at work, I heat it in that little mini lunchbox that I'm telling you about. It's called a Hot Logic. So it's like a little zipper closed lunchbox. I don't know if I can, I was going to say I could grab it, but it's not. And you plug it in. So it has a little heating element in the bottom of it and it warms food. It's not super fast, but if I heat it, if I plug it in about 60 to 90 minutes before, it'll actually take my frozen meal and heat it to hot. Wow.
So they're asking on the chat if these recipes are listed somewhere. And the answer to that is yes. You can go to her website, Paleo.
A lot of them.
Which
a lot of them.
Yeah. I'm going to
If you go back too far, you're going to get a lot of super high histamine things. But yes, the more recent stuff. And I frequently share on my Instagram, what I'm doing. If I make something, I'll try to, if it's not on the website, I'll try to put in kind of what I did. And I've recently been incorporating some reels, which I'm probably not super great at, but I'm incorporating some reels and showing the steps in some of the cooking. I'm a big Instant Pot fan. I love making single or double serving soups. And that's another thing is, if you're making something already, you're asking like, what do I freeze? If I'm making soup, I make double and I put half of it away. I don't just put it in the refrigerator and let it rot. It's like, put it into a Pyrex and take it for a meal. Some day in a week or two, you're going to be like, I'm running late and I need a meal. And you'll pop it out and you'll be like, this is great.
Do you meal prep on a specific day every week? Are you organized like that you say every Sunday I do this or?
So I used to do really like one big session where I would be kind of at it like all afternoon on a weekend day, but I really don't do it that way anymore. I really have such a system down that I just sort of, on the weekends, I sort of take inventory of what I may be low on and I will prep what I need. So like my weekly prep, I make a mayonnaise out of aquafaba, which is the liquid from chickpea can. And it's basically just oil, aquafaba, lemon. I know you're like, wait a minute, what?
Wait a second. Hold on.
What? Don't throw it away.
Aquafaba?
Aquafaba is the liquid inside of a can of chickpeas. And it's like amazing stuff. And it freezes.
Wait, so you
don't
just
throw it away, please.
Oh, I want to understand this. You open a can of chickpeas and then you take the liquid out and you say, I think I should freeze this and use it in the future.
Well, I mean, it's well known that aquafaba is a thing. I mean, and there are recipes for like meringues and you could use it the way that you use egg whites.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, the mayonnaise is delicious. I can't have eggs and I love mayonnaise. So the mayonnaise is amazing. And so I make hummus every week and I make mayonnaise every week. So it's like I do those together because the hummus, the chickpeas get made into the hummus and the aquafaba gets made into mayonnaise and it's delicious mayonnaise. And I get to control the oil that's in it.
Right. So and you're not using all those junky seed oils that cause inflammatory responses. Correct. Because those seed oils are terrible for you. We talk about those all the time. We were talking before the call that we're doing Rejuva fast and we have a bunch of the rejuvenators on here who are probably really hungry especially talking
I know.
about
I was like, I was thinking like,
we're
oh
like,
my
do we
God,
need to talk about chickpeas right now? You couldn't schedule this next week. But we are strong and empowered, and we are resilient humans, and we do not.
I'm actually 18 hours into a fast.
Yay! So,
Yeah.
well, one of the things that my partner always talks about is these seed oils and how oils are so bad for you, and you find these oils everywhere.
Very inflammatory.
Yeah, and for me, it's been a challenge because for so long I was like, no sugar, no sugar, no sugar, and then you add on oils to the mix, and you're like, wait a second, and this is why I wanted to interview you, because just sugar alone is such a challenge. Then you tack on oils, and that's a challenge. And then people start telling you, well, no, but even healthy foods can be unhealthy for you and can cause a response. And it can be really overwhelming. It could be really challenging. And you could want to just give up because then you feel like I can't eat anything. So I love the fact that you're sharing with us how you're and this is so important, right? Like you went through that elimination period and you eliminated to get to the core of what is it you can eat, and also to stabilize yourself and say, okay, now I did
it for a long time. Yeah.
Right. And like you got to a place where now you know what base feeling good feels like. Because at the beginning of the call, you said, I didn't even know what it felt like.
I didn't know. I didn't know that I didn't know that everyone didn't have a stomach ache every day. Like I literally was like, my stomach's not growling and I'm not bloated. Like, what? Is this what it's supposed to feel like? Like I really didn't know that was not normal.
And now that you know how good it feels, now you're stable enough and you have enough of a system and you're confident enough and you understand enough about your body that now you can turn that elimination into expansion.
Yeah, and so that's definitely my angle now.
I love that you did that.
Yeah.
We often think that we're going to get stuck in that elimination and the sacrifice just doesn't seem worth it, but we fail to remember that no, you can restrict and eliminate, but then you can start a new journey of expansion.
Yes.
That is amazing. Melanie.
Yeah, I think that you've seen recently on my Instagram that I've been doing this food variety project. So I just made this little chart for myself that has all the different foods that I'm currently eating. And then when I eat them, I check them off. And I aim to have at least 100 different foods in a week. I've actually been hitting a little bit higher than that. But what it does, I mean, it's not anything that's, rigid or hard and fast in terms of what I need to do, but it just encourages me not to, I could be happy to have salmon and hummus every day and broccoli or asparagus. Like there's certain things I really love and and it's easy to just go to those same things, but this just encourages me to make new combinations and to try new things. And I've been adding in a lot of different teas, their teas can be another rich source of polyphenols. And so it's just sort of a cool, we're only 10% human, right? So we're mostly we're the bugs that live inside of us. And so we try to keep 10%
human.
Yeah, most of the genetic material in our body is not our own. It's mostly microbiome. So it's, it's important really. In the healing journey, it was important for me to narrow and eliminate and reduce inflammation. But now that I've kind of stabilized, it's really important on the flip side of that to try to include a lot of variety.
Wow. So. And a question that was pressing at me, but I didn't want to interrupt you, was when you said that you make single serving portions because your husband is lucky enough to be able to eat whatever he wants. How does that work? Do you cook for your husband?
So that was one of the things when my mom and I were talking about, like, what questions were going to come up. I am in a kind of unique situation that my husband is an excellent cook. And so I'm not really responsible for the family meals. And when my kids are grown and we're empty nesting, but, my husband did the bulk of the family cooking. So I was not, we almost always ate like common side dishes, but but I often would have my own proteins in particular. They're a little more sensitive as it relates to histamine. So no, I don't. I'm not responsible, and that is a unique thing that everyone couldn't duplicate. I'm sure most of your people are responsible for cooking for an entire family.
Yeah. And it's not fun when your husband and your kids are asking you for white rice and black beans, all the Cubans in the group.
Yeah.
And your family's asking you for white rice and black beans, and you're making this food and feeling.
And you can't have it.
Yeah, you can't have it. And listen, everything is about perspective. You can learn, just like you have learned to go to a social party and not be tempted by the foods, you can learn to cook that food and not be tempted by it. I was thinking this fast, a few fasts, I've been doing these 5-day fasts for over a year now. And the first few times that I did them, those first days, everything that I smelled was a huge temptation. And it was very, very challenging to look at the food and smell the food, what everybody was eating. And I'm lucky that my family, my husband eats the same way as I do. So we have pretty much the same meals, but those meals look a lot more delicious when you've been fasting for a few days. You know, you're just like, oh, I want them. So you want it so bad. And I really struggled. And I felt like I have to get away from it. I don't want to look at it. I want to escape the temptation. And this fast, I've noticed that last night I sat at dinner with my family, and my kid's godfather was in town, and they made a delicious meal for the family. And I sat with them and I didn't eat. And I also didn't feel like I was missing out on anything, because I was really excited that I got to do this fast. And I was really excited that I know that I'm in this journey and I already know what's on the other side. And I guess by that training in me, I'm no longer as tempted. I mean, sometimes it's difficult?
Yeah,
of course, but it wasn't the same, like, I can't look at it. I can't look at it. Like it doesn't have the same power over me that it used to have. So I suspect that if anybody went on this journey and said, I'm going to go the Margaret route and I'm going to do this for myself, I suspect that at the beginning, it might be a real challenge, but eventually you start to build that tolerance around those temptations.
So I think that something we haven't touched on that I think is important is blood sugar, right? So when you're fasting, if you're metabolically flexible, right, and you're fat adapted, I think that the average normal weighted person walks around with, don't quote me on this, but I think it's 50,000 calories worth of fat. It's some enormous amount.
Dr. Sanchez has said 77,000 for some people.
Right. So I think the average normally weighted person is 50,000 calories of fat on board, right? And why is it that we would be hungry, like when we have all of this stored fuel, right? What is fat? Fat is stored fuel. Why would we be hungry? Well, it's because when our insulin levels are elevated, we can't access our fat stores. So then we get on this roller coaster of, being hungry in between meals, which we should be able to go at least 4 hours without eating and not be hungry. But if we're not fat adapted, if we're not metabolically flexible, then we're hungry all the time. And I think that, with practice with your fasting, and, your body becoming metabolically flexible, then I think being around food temptation becomes easier when your blood sugar is allowing you to not be hungry. And I remember a friend of mine who, she couldn't believe that I was like, I'm not hungry in between meals. She didn't believe me. She was like, I don't believe that. The minute I'm finished eating breakfast, she would be like, I'm already thinking about when is lunch? What am I having? I'm fantasizing about it, and I think that's pretty commonplace. I think that people walk around hungry and they restrict and limit and those things because hunger is such a powerful force. But I think that that's also tied into, it's an important piece. Blood sugar is an important piece. And it's something that can be manipulated as well. I don't know if you're familiar with Glucose Goddess.
Oh my God, I love her. But just real quick on this, and this is super important to note, your weight doesn't have anything to do with your metabolic flexibility. You could be thin and not be metabolically flexible, have those insulin spikes that you're talking about. So, you know, when we think of metabolic flexibility, we probably think of people that are in shape, but this is way beyond, that goes way deeper than that. And that's why I think it's so important that regardless of whether we are overweight or thin or we feel like we're in shape, we still have to go through that journey to make sure, are we metabolically flexible? Do we have these symptoms? Are we spiking? Have you worn a glucose monitor?
Oh,
yeah. So I've worn it, I've done it like 3 or 4 times already. And my family's always like, why are you wearing a glucose monitor? You're not diabetic. I'm like, but we should all know. Everyone needs to know.
It's so cool. Yeah, I'm a super biohacker. I'm all into my devices. I have ketone breath meters. I wear an Oura ring. I have done the CGM. I have
what's the CGM? I don't know that one.
The continuous glucose. That's what you're talking about.
Okay. That's fancy words. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the lingo for the people that are in the know.
Yeah. If it's some sort of a biohack, there's a very good chance I've done it.
Well, I've been wanting to do the Oura ring myself, and I haven't done it, but that's on my radar to do that ring, because that ring tracks, for those of you that don't know, it tracks like your sleep and your oxygen, and they say that it's very enlightening, and you learn a lot about yourself and about how you rest and how you recover and your oxygen levels and all that stuff. I think it's really
cool. It's very cool.
As for, you were talking about the glucose goddess, and I didn't want to get you off that. I love the glucose goddess, but she just came out with her book.
Yes, she did. I mean, I just think what's important about her is that she's showing people who don't necessarily, I mean, it's a broad audience, right? But she's showing people that even if you don't want to make dramatic lifestyle changes, the timing, the order of how you eat things can also be impactful, right? So even if you're someone who's like, I'm not willing to make these big lifestyle changes, right? But you could start your meal with a vegetable starter, right? Or you could, and you could hold your carbohydrate until the end of the meal. You could still be eating the same meal, but the order in which you eat. Like, there's so many nuances, right? That's the crazy thing when you really start to pay attention to all of this stuff, is there's so many layers of nuance. And, you know, the order in which you eat food, the same foods. And she has these great graphs. If you're not familiar with her, she's on Instagram under Glucose Goddess, but you know, she shows you how she ate the exact same thing. She had vinegar before, or she ate it in a different order, or she walked for 10 minutes after she ate the exact same thing, and the glucose response was significantly improved by one hack or another. That she has a bunch of different hacks. And that's another really important thing. And I think that for you, I don't really know the ins and outs of your everyday diet, but, you know, it's obviously going to get easier and easier to fast if your body can go into those 50,000 calories and like tap into that bank, right? If you can't tap into that bank, then the powerful hunger urge is it's going to win, right? It's not going to, like, you can only white knuckle it so much.
Right.
I mean,
right. And the cool thing about the hacks that you're talking about, and the changing the order of the foods, and trying different things, and wearing these monitors, and figuring these things out, the fundamental principle behind all of that is that there is no one size fits all. So you can't take Margaret's lifestyle and diet and say, I'm just going to do exactly that. And maybe it doesn't work for you, or maybe, you know, you have different allergic responses, or maybe it's not enough food for you, or it doesn't make you happy. You know, we just don't know. Everybody's circumstances and lifestyles are so different, but the only way to start claiming your health is by starting somewhere, and then using that intentionality and logging it and tracking it and tweaking and experimenting and being patient, I guess, with.
Yeah. I mean, I really hope that in the future that some form of medicine will be more precision. And I think that the pieces that will come into play that are not in play right now will be testing the microbiome, right? Like some microbiome testing will become more relevant. I think there's no doubt that, you know, some of, like, I have a lot of what are called genetic SNPs, which means they're like little miswrites in my DNA, and they can have a big impact. And knowing which ones those are can be helpful. There's a lot of, you know, hormonal pieces to it too. So I'm hoping that in the future, it may be easier to figure out what your secret sauce is, right? Like, I've done a lot of biohacking to find what works for me. And like you said, it's definitely not necessarily what somebody else needs. And that's a hard piece of it. But I'm hoping that in the future, maybe some of those things will become more mainstream.
I actually did a test for my husband. I want to say it was called Viome. Was it called
Yeah.
Viome? And it was a microbiome test, and it was supposed to test the gut, you know, his gut and the poop, to make sure that what foods he was sensitive to. And some of the foods that he was eating on a daily basis, it came out that weren't good for him, like broccoli, for example. But yet there were foods that he wasn't eating, such as watercress, that were optimal foods for him. So just those different tweaks, he's made those changes. And you know, some of the things he would like rice noodles, for example. He used to get this soup. It was like the pho soup from a Thai restaurant, and he loved that soup, and it was all vegetables, and it was a great broth, and he loved it. But he would drink that soup, and the next day he would gain 5 pounds. 5 pounds the next day. He was heavier, and he couldn't figure it out. And people were telling him it was the sodium in the soup, or maybe it was some other ingredient in the soup. Well, it turns out it was the rice noodles. Of all the carbohydrates known to man, the only one that this man has an actual intolerance for are rice noodles. So now he can remove the rice noodles, still have the soup, and problem solved. He can enjoy his soup. He just can't have the rice noodles. So now instead of having rice noodles, he'll do miracle noodles.
I was going to say he needs to
he just puts miracle noodles in there. Even white pasta would have been better for him than those rice noodles.
Well, they're very glycemic too.
Yeah. So that was something that he would have a real reaction to it. So when the test confirmed that, it was so validating, because he was like, that's the missing piece in the soup. Now I know, you know, it was great. So hopefully this inspires all of our audience to kind of play, you know, approach their lifestyle with curiosity, instead of this rigidness of like, I have to be paleo or I have to be keto, but more of, I have to be curious. I got to take notes. I got to log my food. I got to figure out, and I got to eliminate the ones that are just the most popular, right? Like start with the sugar, oils, carbs, like those are like the most popular, and then start eliminating until you then can start expanding, which like you said, I mean, that's just a great formula for success. Does anybody have any questions that you want to ask her? Because we got about 10 minutes left, and you guys may have a lot of questions, and I want to make sure that we honor that. So I have a question here. Susan wants you to talk about your flatbread green bread.
So that, I kind of got off kilter when I was talking about like my weekly prep. Those both are items that are in the weekly prep. So I make a green bread. I think you've had it. I didn't invent that completely. It is on my website. A recipe that I follow is there. I was inspired by somebody else on Instagram to sort of start tinkering with that. But it's basically a whole food processor worth of greens and herbs. And I garden, so I can just walk outside and get kale and get collards, and I have all the herbs, rosemary and thyme and oregano and chives and all that stuff. And I throw that all into the food processor, and I add in flax and olive oil and water and a little bit of salt, and I process it until it's like a paste. This recipe's on my blog. And then I smear it out into a circle on parchment, and I dehydrate it, and it ends up, depending on how long I go. It can be a flexible wrap that you could actually like use flexibly, or the way I've been liking it lately is actually a little more crunchy, like almost like a softer cracker. And if you think about that, I mean, you're getting greens, you're getting olive oil, you're getting golden flax. I mean, it's like, and herbs. It's such a great food.
Yeah.
And the she's talking about the flatbread. So recently I've discovered someone on Instagram who's goes as sweet as honey, and she does keto recipes, and I've tried a bunch of her recipes, which are really good. And I've been making, and my mom has too, these little flatbreads that are made out of coconut flour and psyllium. I can't do egg. Psyllium, and some of them have almond flour, some of them don't. Olive oil, and they are like a little tortilla kind of, and they freeze well. So I always have in my freezer. The green bread I actually freeze, and I try to freeze. I try to make, like right now I've been working on batches of those. So I'm making them 18 at a time, and I freeze them. And then in the summer I'll have like my garden greens when I can't garden, which is really fun. She also has a great bun recipe and some loaf ones that are all based on psyllium. So it's a good fiber source, and they taste delicious. They toast up really well.
So how much time would you say that you dedicate to creation and meal planning of your food, like cooking and meal planning? Because the one thing I'm suspecting is that there might be people on this call that are like, that sounds phenomenal. I'm one of them. That sounds amazing. But I don't have, right now, I'm not dedicating enough time to the kitchen to be able to come up with those kinds of things, right? Because I mean, I'm taking the kids to football, and I'm, you know, I want simple, I want easy. I want to streamline it as much as possible. So I'm curious, how much time do you spend making these kinds of things?
So in terms of like meal planning, I don't meal plan. I don't have like a weekly meal plan. These days, in terms of prepping, I do like little mini sessions. I don't do like when I was starting to explain that. I don't do like I used to do a whole Sunday or a whole Saturday afternoon. I would just be in the kitchen, and it would be like a disaster everywhere, pots and pans, and you know, I would do all of my prepping. I don't really do it that way. It's like I'm making something else, and I'll throw in some chicken while the oven's already heated, you know, and then I'll just chop it up and put it in the freezer. Or, you know, I do spend some time, maybe throughout the whole week. Like I may spend 2 hours, maybe. It's an estimate. It's, you know, and it varies from week to week. Some weeks I don't need to make. I barely make anything because I have a whole stash of things. So some weeks I'll sort of run down my list. I have like a little weekend to-do list that I keep, and I, you know, go through it every weekend, and it'll be like, do I need this? Do I need that? And sometimes I don't need to make any of it. So it'll vary, but maybe 2 hours, and usually in like little mini sessions.
Well, yeah. And I think that's important, because if we could look at that, we could say, okay, well, can we find little mini, you know, can I find 30 minutes to give this a whirl, to try to do this, you know, or maybe today I'm going to dedicate an hour or 2 hours today, but I'm going to make enough so that next week I don't have to do that. And if it's that much of a priority to you, then you'll find the time. It's just, it's just a matter of making it happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely think, you know, you are in a stage where your kids are younger. You know, I've been there, and you're going to baseball and you're going to soccer, and, you know,
we're on the go.
Definitely more challenging.
Yeah.
I was doing it back then, but then again, the food that I'm prepping is usually mostly, the prepped food is usually mostly for myself.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, we make it work, right? And just like you have a system, for me, what's helped is that we eat the foods we eat, if that makes any sense. So right now, I'm more about being efficient than being varied. I don't need that much variety right now, because right now I just need to get it done. So if I know that chicken thighs, and like, for example, your chicken thighs, one of your recipes calls for dried shallots, and I've been getting those dried shallots on Amazon because of you, all this time, and I use your thermometer. Like, I get a bunch of stuff from your website. But let's say, for example, I liked your chicken recipe, and I can make that. And I know that I like chicken thighs. I know that's something that I like. I know that I can cook them. You know, I know that there's certain, I have like this rice and chicken thing that I do in the Instapot. It works for my family. And I just make that. And I know that it's a go-to. So I am very good about the go-tos. What I struggle with a little bit more is the creative part, right? Like I went to Susan's house and I had the green flatbread and I thought it was amazing. And it's been on my list of things that I want to do. But I haven't gotten to making that green flatbread because it's not in my repertoire. But I have.
My mom always says. My mom always says that, you know, because for a while my food wasn't very varied. Right now it's a focus, but it wasn't. There was a point at which it wasn't very varied, and she always says like people don't eat as much. They don't eat as much variety as they think they do. And you know what? That I'm saying that only because you were talking about the boredom factor and people saying like, "Ugh, I couldn't do that. It'd be so boring." But if you really think about it, okay, like this is my little like food variety thingy that I'm doing right now, right? You know, but if you really like broke down those things, they wouldn't be as many. They would be like the same, you know, the rice or the same chicken or the same like vegetables in different forms, but they'd really be like this. I mean, I'm not saying yours specifically. I'm just saying in general.
No, 100%. You know, when you said 100 foods, my thought was, I wonder if I eat 100 foods in my diet. I don't know that I do. I don't know that I do. I'd have to sit down and study it.
Yeah, I mean, and I will count herbs, right? Like, so if I go out to the garden and I chop up, I grab a handful of thyme and I put it into something. That's a check for me. So it doesn't have to be like a big, like, I think if I ate 100 and like, I think last week it was 139. If I ate 139 foods in full portions, you know, I'd be 8,000 pounds. You know, it couldn't be like that, right? I mean, the point is not that. The point is, I think that you reposted the slaw that I made yesterday, right? So I made a slaw and it had like all sorts of colorful vegetables. And then it had like this much chopped herbs from the garden, right? So the point was just like to get them all in there,
right?
You know, to get in the dill and the chives and the mint and, you know, all of these fresh things, which I won't be able to do as much in the summer because I won't have it out my back door.
Right. Well, our hour is coming to a close. I want to thank you so much, Margaret. This has been so much fun. Yeah. Everyone is thanking you on the chat for sharing your story. I hope that this has inspired the people on this call to take their health into their own hands and to really explore what foods trigger their health conditions and which ones help them feel better. Thank you for sharing everything with us. For those of you that are not following Margaret, please go to Instagram, PaleoGirl99. Follow her website. You can subscribe to her website, PaleoGirl99. You can see all her recipes and all her things. And we will have to have you on again one day for more information because you are just a wealth of information. And I know that you and I were talking about maybe you sharing your variety food list with us. So maybe that's on the, we can get that on for the girls one day. Everybody is so happy with your call. Everybody's thanking you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story.
I hope you guys all on social media. Feel free to see.
Everybody go ahead and follow her and make sure that you comment and let her know, send her a message, let her know how much you like the call. Tell her, you know, feel free to ask it. They can ask you questions, right? Like about your foods and your stuff. Yeah. So engage with her on Instagram and repost her stuff and let's keep spreading the good word. So thank you guys. Have a good one. Take care.
Bye.
Bye everybody.